Tell us your name and about your project.
My name is Gustav Ludwig Hertz. I was born in Hamburg, Germany on July 22nd, 1887. After this, I went and studied at Munich and Berlin universities, where I graduated in 1911. Shortly after graduation, James Franck and I began experimenting using a glass vacuum tube that we had filled with mercury vapor that had a negative charge on one side, a positive grid-like plate in the middle, and then a negative plate on the back side that we used as a collector plate.
What were you trying to prove with your experiment?
Frank and I were trying to prove that atoms had different energy levels, kind of like Bohr's model of the atom. That is a good representation for this, showing that different energy rings surrounding the atom are present. In other words, we wanted to prove that electrons exist in quantized energy levels. And while performing this experiment, we noticed a significant drop in current around 4.9 volts. Now, this continued at every multiple of 4.9 volts, which showed that the quantum theory and Bohr's model were at least somewhat correct.
Where did you perform your experiments?
Frank and I performed our experiment on April 4th, 1914, right before I was mobilized and sent to battle during World War I. The experiment took place at the University of Berlin.
What other significant events happened in 1914?
There was so much going on in 1914 that our experiment almost kind of seemed like a drop of water in a bucket, even though it was a very significant finding. Germany declared a state of war sometime in July before our experiment took place, and while our experiment was taking place, Germany directly declared war on France. That is a day I will never forget. And the Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, who was the heir to the throne, was assassinated sometime around the conclusion of our experiment.
Who else was involved in the experiment?
As I mentioned before, James Franck was also involved in the experiment, hence the name, the Franck-Hertz experiment. He was an essential partner in this experiment, and I could not have done it without him. Frank was also born in Hamburg, Germany, and studied at the Humboldt University of Berlin.
What was your role in the experiment?
I worked side by side with Frank during the experiment, changing the voltage, measuring how much current was getting through, but my least favorite job was heating the vacuum tubes. When we put the mercury in, it was not a vapor, so we had to heat it, and I just burnt myself one too many times. Our later experiment using neon gas was much more enjoyable.
What input did your project have on the physics community?
Our experiment proved the quantum nature of atoms and gave many other scientists a gateway to further explore atoms and how they work. Albert Einstein even said how our experiment was so good it made him want to cry. So that made me very proud of our accomplishments and made me really believe that they will help further our understanding of the world and possibly make it a better place someday.
Do you have any interesting stories about life during the Nazi regime?
Actually, I do. Frank and I both fought in World War I, which was good because the Nazi rule of Germany was a rather dark time for us, being of Jewish descent. But since we fought in the war, we were offered immunity. So we were able to carry out our research, but Frank was being forced to treat his Jewish peers and friends differently, which he did not like. So he took a rather risky approach to the situation and quit, so he didn't do any more research for a while. Well, he fled, but he knew they were going to come after his Nobel Prize, so he hid it at the Bohr's University, which was a good spot at the time, but however, the Nazis did wind up invading the university. So in a last-ditch effort to save the metals, a chemist named George D. Hevese dissolved the gold using acid and hid it from the Nazis, who would not know what it was anyhow. Well, later on, after the war, the gold was later reclaimed and sent back to the Nobel Society, where they melted it down back into the metals that he had received for winning the Nobel Prize for the research we did in our experiment. Thank you for interviewing me. It has been an honor to share how some of our research impacted the world, what our research was about, and some of the current events that took place in that time. Thank you.